Pierre de Lancre. Let's start with one of the most cruel witch hunters in history. Pierre de Lancre was a judge born in 1553 in Bordeaux, France. In 1609, de Lancre was instructed by King Henry IV to investigate and eradicate witchcraft in southwestern France. Apparently, the area was overrun with witches. De Lancre was obsessed with eradicating any signs of witchcraft, and thus his witch hunting began. He was known for his cruelty and torture methods, as he believed that only through extreme pain could the truth be revealed. He often tortured his victims with the burning of hot irons, drowning, and sleep deprivation. Oh, you thought this was it? He also used various torture devices such as the strappado, the rack, and the Spanish boot. This man tried anything to get a confession out of his victims, and once a confession was obtained, the victims were typically sentenced to death, often by burning at the stake. Over the cause of his witch hunting, he was responsible for around 70 executions, but many believe it was much more. He terrorized the locals and spread fear, paranoia, and panic. De Lancre usually accused women, and as much as rumors or allegations would be enough for him to torture you. For example, if someone called you a witch, de Lancre would show up and take care of you. He destroyed dozens of families and communities, but thankfully he was only active in witch hunting for 1 year. De Lancre died on the 9th of February 1631 in Lubin, France, and is notorious for being one of the most controversial and brutal witch hunters ever. He never saw justice because at the time everything he did was legal. Buhram Jamedar. Buhram Jamedar was born around 1790 in India. Little is known about his early life and family background, but he eventually became one of the most feared men in India when he became associated with the Thuggee cult, a secret religious society that operated in India from the 13th to the 19th century. The cult was known for its robberies, brutal murders, ritualistic assassinations, and human sacrifices. Historians estimate that the cult murdered tens of thousands of people. Who do you think their targets typically were? Rich people, influential leaders, or maybe rulers? No. They primarily targeted travelers and visitors by joining groups, gaining their trust, and then murdering them in secluded areas by strangling them with a ceremonial cloth called a rumal. I never thought a piece of cloth could be dangerous to anyone, but I take it all back. If you had visited India in the 19th century, there'd be a good chance that Buhram Jamedar and the Thuggee cult would have unalived you. Buhram quickly rose through the cult's ranks and soon became one of their most feared and respected leaders, giving him the name Thug Buhram, King of the Thugs, which I have to admit sounds pretty cool. If they'd had ID cards back then, this man probably would have had Thug written on his ID. Buhram is believed to have been personally responsible for the deaths of over 900 people, making him one of the most dangerous serial killers in history. He said, "I may have strangled with my own hands about 125 men, and I may have seen strangled 150 more." When British colonial authorities launched an operation to eradicate the Thuggee cult, they captured and imprisoned Buhram Jamedar. He reportedly cooperated and gave authorities detailed information about the cult's whereabouts, operations, and members. But his snitching didn't change his fate because he was executed by hanging in 1840, and the Thuggee cult fell apart soon after. Fritz Haarmann. Fritz Haarmann, also known as the Vampire or Butcher, was born on October 25, 1879 in Hanover, Germany. He was a quiet child and the youngest of 6. Fritz had a troubled childhood, often getting abused by one of his brothers, and it's believed that his troubled childhood would later turn him into the monster he would become. Because between 1918 and 1924, Haarmann was responsible for the deaths of at least 24 people. His victims were typically young homeless men. Haarmann lured them by promising them work, food, or money, and first gained their trust before assaulting and murdering them. He killed his victims by biting through their throats or strangling them. Now you know why people called him a vampire. His favorite method of killing was biting through the victim's throat, which is insanely disturbing. If you thought vampires never existed, he is proof they did. Allegedly, he even ate parts of his murdered victims. He would then dismember the bodies and dispose of the remains in various ways, including selling the flesh as pork on the black market. Imagine you're buying some meat only for you to find out it's human flesh. Haarmann also had an accomplice, 24-year-old Hans Grans, whom he loved and had an intimate relationship with. Hans Grans also lured many young men to Haarmann's apartment, where Haarmann would proceed to assault and murder them. Hans Grans was later on also murdered by Fritz. You guessed it, by biting through his throat. He murdered 24 young men and was caught in 1924 when the disappearance of several young men was linked to him. When authorities found human remains near his residence, he was arrested and charged with multiple counts of murder. To get him to testify, he was allegedly deprived of his sleep, and in his cell were skulls with lit candles in them. In December 1924, Fritz Haarmann was convicted of 24 murders and sentenced to death. He was executed by guillotine on April 15, 1925, in Hanover. His last wish was for them to execute him in public, a wish they didn't grant him. Gilles de Rais. Gilles de Rais, born around September 1404 into one of the most powerful and wealthy noble families in France, was one of the sickest people to have ever lived. He was a high-ranking soldier and was appointed Marshal of France, one of the highest military honors of the time. But this would all change soon when he was distinguished from the military. He lived lavishly, and when his money began to deteriorate, he engaged in demonic rituals in hopes of restoring his wealth. For example, he tried to summon demons and even sacrificed humans. And if you thought this was bad enough, wait until you hear what he would go on to do. Because from 1432 to 1440, he would abduct, torture, and murder many children, primarily boys. Children were lured to his castles with promises of employment or education. The children would then be assaulted and abused. The victims were eventually killed, and their bodies were mutilated, sometimes dismembered. The exact number of his victims is unknown, but estimates range from 80 to over 200 innocent children. In 1440, Duke John V ordered an investigation into Gilles de Rais' castle because more and more disappearances were happening. When authorities raided his castle, their discoveries were shocking. They found the remains of several children, including bones and decomposed body parts, various torture instruments, occult texts for rituals, demonic altars, and even surviving victims. When Gilles de Rais was trialed, he confessed to his crimes, and on October 26, 1440, he, along with two of his accomplices, were executed. They were hanged, and their bodies were burned afterward, serving as a warning against such inhumane and sick crimes. Elizabeth Báthory. Elizabeth Báthory was born into a Hungarian noble family on August 7, 1560. She married Ferenc Nadasdy, a Hungarian nobleman and soldier, when she was just 14 years old. Little did he know that he married one of the most evil and sadistic women in human history, because she went on to murder anywhere from 80 to over 600 innocent girls. According to testimonies from survivors and witnesses, she used various cruel torture methods, including beating or mutilating the victims, burning them with hot iron, or letting them freeze to death during the winter in cold water. She sometimes tortured girls by driving needles into their fingers, cutting their noses or lips, or whipping them with stinging nettles. Allegedly, she even bit the shoulders and breasts, as well as burning the flesh, including the genitals of some victims. Some of her victims were covered with honey and left outside for insects to devour. There are even claims that she bathed in the blood of her victims, believing it would maintain her youth and beauty. All of these accusations gave her the nickname the Blood Countess. When King Matthias II of Hungary ordered an investigation, they found horrible things. They reportedly found several murdered and dying girls. Elizabeth Báthory and 4 of her servants were arrested, who were accused of being her accomplices. When her servants confessed to the murders, they were executed while Elizabeth was confined to her castle, where she remained until her death on August 21, 1614. To this day, she is known as the most prolific female killer in history.